Cześć, witajcie. Witam Was bardzo serdecznie. Nie wiem, czy będziecie oglądać to rano, czy wieczorem, ale to nie ma znaczenia, bo ta rozmowa się nadaje na wszystkie części dnia, na wszystkie części życia. I bardzo się cieszę, że trochę spełnia się moje osobiste marzenie spotkania z Esther Perel, ale też wiem, że wielu z Was i wiele z Was ma podobne marzenie i dzisiaj to się ziszcza przy okazji nowego wydania dwóch wspaniałych już książek, które od lat są na rynku, a teraz w nowej szacie graficznej i z nowym, wspaniałym takim wnętrzem, które opowiada o tym, jak nawigować życiowe klimaty, które są dla nas często wyzwaniami w relacji ze sobą, w relacji z drugim człowiekiem, ale też w relacji z całym światem. So my warm welcome to Poland and to Warsaw in this May part of the year, which is the most beautiful month, I guess, to see Warsaw in. So welcome.
It's been beautiful from the moment I woke up this morning.
Esther, before we started recording, I told you that I had this question the moment I woke up today at 5 a.m. that I wanted to ask you. And I wrote it down, luckily. And the question is, do you ever lose faith in humanity based on what is happening in the world? Because you work with people, you work with individuals and couples and humanity in general. Do you ever lose faith that we are doing good?
I probably lose faith very often. Not just do I ever. I lose faith very often. I think we are capable of the worst and the most unhuman. We're the only one that kill our own kind gleefully. And at the same time, I also, in the same day, in the same moment sometimes, can have the other side, that we also can do acts of incredible altruism and generosity. And for me, I think if I didn't work with people, I would probably be very, very down. But it's the act of doing, of being involved, even if it's on the small level, that kind of, at least I don't feel always the helplessness of the problem being so big that there is nothing I can do.
So, did I get it right that if any of our listeners or people who are going to watch this, if they ever lose hope based on, especially what is happening next to our border in Poland, with the war just the door behind, if they ever lose hope, your idea would be to focus on the good and find the good in the closest sphere to theirs life.
No, the idea would be to do something good, not to find the good. It's action and being proactive that makes you feel that at least you're not sitting helplessly watching this tidal wave come over you against which you can do absolutely nothing. So reach out to the neighbor, the refugee, the homeless person, something that you can translate into action. I think that if you are active, you feel less despairing. If you can do for somebody else, you feel like you have resources. And it probably is something that I took from my dad, who spent years in concentration camps here and who did a ton. And I think that is a major piece of what kept him alive, is to feel like I can help others. I can make other people's lives slightly less miserable. Therefore, I have still a lot to offer, to give, and it humanizes me.
Do you think there's a chance you chose this profession because of that?
No, I chose this profession because I was a troubled teenager that needed to understand her inner turmoil and started to read psychology to help me understand myself like many other people.
It's a great answer.
I didn't start with lofty goals. I knew I have a knack. I knew relationships. I could understand relationships better than I could understand nature or animals or other large systems. So I was intrigued by the system of relationships. But honestly, once I started to read, because I hated school and because I didn't like the way the teachers treated the students, so I started to read books about alternative education, and then it led me to read books about psychological development, and then it led, and then I thought, what I do with my friends, I actually could do that as part of my work. Confide, give ideas, think, let people,
Yeah. And what is the best part of your job?
The best part of my job, it's, you know, if you ask an artist, they would tell you that it's the fact that you can create till the day you drop dead. And I think it's the same. A therapist, as long as my brain works, even if I can't move, I can still work and be of service and be relevant, be engaged in the world. You think you've heard it all, but you haven't. There's always another twist in a story. That it's like the same song in 10 versions still has a diversity of versions to the song. So it's the fact that human life can be endlessly fascinating. And trying to change people or help them change or help them deal with their impasses or their gridlocks or their sexual lives, etc., or their basically all the relational conflicts, and is an art. It's not just a technique, it's not just a science that you can perfect till the end. So what I like the most is the endlessly interesting nature of what I do. The fact that you feel that you are relevant and that you do something that is actually interesting and useful and helpful, and that it's an art as well as a science as well as a skill.
So going to the other side, what is the least favorite in your job?
The least favorite part is when you feel like, when you start to worry that you are useless. It's the opposite, that you're not able to help, that you're not able to make a dent in a case that you present. The least, maybe sometimes the least is not so much things that happen to me, it's more when I see it's when I look at the world, when I see polarization in the world, when I see people who are not able to talk to each other at all, when I see the growing social atrophy with people who, you know, we had a conversation yesterday and my editor said something very interesting. She said, we are very adept these days at expressing our needs, but we're not so good at discussing them. And that means being in relationship to others with our needs, you know, to just know what I want, so what? So this notion in our Western world where we have become so focused on the self and less on the relationships, that I find challenging. And when I'm not able to do something about that, because I think that it's a problem, then I find myself less relevant.
And what do you do to get out of this state?
I talk to smart people. I get ideas from lots of other people. I read. I see because it's not my problem alone. So how do other people deal with this? What else has anybody else come up with that could be relevant about this? Where can I go and sit in an interesting conversation with people that think very differently from me? That's the main thing. I don't just seek people who think like me.
So who is your inspiration in moments like these? Like, where do you go? Who do you talk to?
I'm going to be in a meeting coming up soon that has, you know, the head of the former person that led to the peace negotiations in Sri Lanka. I mean, it's you know, people who work in the Middle East, people who work in it's politicians, it's peace negotiators, it's sociologists, it's anthropologists, it's artists. It's not just from my own field. And I'm going to be spending a whole day in a conversation about that polarization. How do we create, you know, openings? Sometimes I go to philosophers. Sometimes I go to classicists. I mean, it's kind of far and wide where I cast my net. It's I think that you get a new input not by going in a straight line. It's just being very free associative. You know, for example, I've gotten interested in biomimicry because I think a natural world is not a place where I usually seek inspiration, but the natural world is extremely good at dealing with crisis and at finding a way to redress itself and to regenerate So what can I learn from the natural world that can help human beings, because we really are not doing too well?
Yeah, yeah. And looking at the world as it is right now, and going back to the situation actually Poland is in right now, next to the war happening. As a psychologist, I hear loads of stories, people coming and sharing that they're anxious or scared, or not knowing what's going to happen next. What would you advise or suggest or help us to navigate the unknown? That is, it's a farm of unknown.
I mean, I don't have, let's be realistic, I don't have ways of saying to people, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
I have no way of reassuring people, but I have ideas about what helps us when we deal with uncertainty. And that is not just, you know, about taking tranquilizers. How do we affect, you know, how do we experience a sense of agency in small doses, so that we don't just feel that we are paralyzed and frozen with fear? Number one. Number two is, how do we join with others? I mean, I think people have forever dealt with the unknown, with the ununderstandable, with the mystery, with evil. You know, people have experienced moral distress, which is what we're talking about. It's not just anxiety, it's also a moral distress. What should I do? What can I do? How much should I do? Should I think about it? Should I not think about it? Should I stay informed? Should I not stay informed? Does it help me to know, or do I feel overwhelmed with I know? Do I have a right not to know and to just kind of go about with my life and pretend that nothing is happening? These are questions that lead to moral distress. Where's my conscience? Not just where are my feelings and where are my fears. Where's my conscience? It's a different, you have parallel tracks here. And I do think that being with others has always helped us the most. Being with others in physical contact as well, not just so that we release, we reset, we regulate together with others, we co-regulate with others in situations like this. People used to go to church, people used to go in religion for all these situations. We need to create experiences that provide us, for those of us who are more secular, with what the church used to provide, or what religion used to provide, which was not always an answer, but a way to live it. And what often makes it much more challenging is that it's me coming to the psychologist, sitting alone in an office to talk to you about the moral distress that has to do with the world around me, rather than sitting with a whole group of people that is singing together or praying together or chanting or holding. That gives a very different experience of the woes of the world.
And looking back at history of Poland, sometimes I feel that with the war and everything that happened after the First World War, the Second World War, that we are, especially the eastern part of Europe, central part of Europe and eastern, the history of our countries is affected by difficulties and distress, as you said, and wars and death. And my question is, knowing all of that, do you think that it's harder for us to notice happiness and enjoying happiness? Because we've been a democratic country for 30 years. It's just one generation, basically. So we're still new at that. But I sense that we might be a country that sabotages joy and happiness and being excited, because we don't know how to handle it. We know how to handle difficulties and the unknown, but it's hard for us, I guess, to navigate happiness. Could that be true?
That's a very interesting question, but I think it's I have a question back. Do you think Poland has reckoned with its wars?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That, you know, that's the first thing, is that, and like in the US, we have not reckoned with our past wars. So then we start and we do this, you know, same things next time. So that's the first thing, is what kind of reckoning has taken place here. There's two parts. There is the legacy of the war, and then there is the legacy of communism. And I think most Eastern European countries, the change was so drastic. And it didn't just go from communism to democracy, it went from communism to capitalism. And the capitalism was like suddenly, it challenged all the rules and all the practices that had been in place, and especially in the clash between individualism and collectivism. Especially in the values of, you know, in this kind of clash of what matters, what actually matters. If you ask me specifically about, you know, do you think we are so used to suffering that we don't know how to be happy? I don't know that suffering has ever prevented that the legacy of suffering. The legacy of suffering prevents people from being happy, but the question of happiness is a question of the neoliberal society. You know, Poland was used to understand that, like many parts of the world, that happiness is for the afterlife. You suffer well here and then you get rewarded later. We brought happiness back down from the heavens to earth. We first made it a possibility and now it's a mandate. You ask Polish parents, like all Western parents, what they want most for their children, and they tell you, I want my kid to be happy. Not to be healthy, not to survive, not to be a good person, you know, to be happy. What the hell does that mean exactly? You know, this constant pursuit of fulfillment and optimization and maximization. Maybe that is what is making us suffer at this moment. It's reverse, you know. I don't know that people didn't have joy when beautiful things happened, when a child was born, when a person was married, when someone was awarded. I think people celebrated. People have celebrated throughout history. But this notion of I'm walking top of the world, you know, that is in itself a source of tremendous frustration and unhappiness at this moment. So I don't know that I want to help people just be happy.
So what do you want to help people with?
To be realistic, to be able to enjoy and experience profound joy and gratitude and connection when it's there, but also to know what to do when shit happens.
Especially then.
You know, it's both ends. I mean, it's always been both ends. Is there a legacy from generation to generation about how much do you have permission to experience pleasure, to think that the world is in a good place, to not only save food, save money, you know, that I do think is part of legacy of communism. It is one generation. I think what is more interesting is the way that people expected that this would be so seamless and so easy. I think on an individual level, we all understand that a certain kind of historical background leads to a certain reality at this in the present. But on a collective level, we just have this. I don't know what people expected. I've had this conversation in Hungary, in Romania, in Poland. You know, it's very interesting. You know, when you have not had much freedom, much personal choice, when all relationships have been dictated by duty and obligation, when you had a lot of clarity but very little personal expression, and you shift to a model where you are supposed to now have choices and options, and you can make the decisions, and you don't have to ask, what should I do? Because it's, what do I want to do? You know, it is confusing everywhere. But because you had such a clear, very recent other model, meaning it still is in the family. It's not that it's just a history class. That becomes a lot more challenging.
And narrowing down to...
what do you think about this, what I'm saying, actually?
The moment you mentioned combining both, like the skill of life or the art of living, for me, is actually what Brené Brown says. It's all about wholehearted living. So it's all about actually navigating both the suffering, which I assume, and especially with experience of my families, that it is sort of like a a glorifying way of suffering, like we suffer for a reason, like there's a reason for it. It was sort of higher than enjoying life and being excited and happy. So there's like a weight to these both sides of life attached. And what you said is navigating both is the skill that I think we need to learn as a society, also as a fresh democracy, that it's both. It's never going to be, even when it was only suffering, people were having, falling in love, they were having babies, they kept on having the spark of joy. So I guess it's all about balancing both and trying to put the same weight to both, that it's not either or, it's both. But for me personally, it's challenging because I have this idea of enjoying life all the time, but then I listen to you and to other more inspirations, and it's like reminding myself that being joyful is like Christmas lights. It's like every now and then. It's not like a constant thing, but I wish for it to be constant.
Why?
Because I think it's safer for me. I feel safer, which is a paradox, because sometimes when I'm suffering, I can relax because the suffering is there, so I don't have to expect it to come, which makes a paradox.
But the other thing that you also have is that it's easier for you to just try to hold one polarity because you have grandmother or whoever in the family holding the other polarity. But the fact is that both of them live inside of us. So this conversation about, are you naive when you think things are good? Because at any moment they can turn around. So why go up if you're going to go down anyway? Stay down, then you know where you belong. And then you don't have to deal with surprises. That's kind of, if I suffer, then I know I don't have to worry that I am going to suffer, I'm there. This, it's an existential conversation, but it's also a very cultural and historical conversation. But the truth is that people did celebrate. People did fall in love. People did have children. They suffered more and they had kids. And today, in some way, sometimes the very people who suffer less don't want kids because they say the world is not a safe place to bring kids in. Whereas a tradition before said the world is not a safe place and children give it meaning. Children give you a sense of purpose and legacy, and if I don't last, at least they will carry me. So there is not really a direct linear line between the hopeful acts we do and the way we see the world. I think that people saw the world often very bleak and did all kinds of things which you would say were crazy to do. They were poor, there was not enough food, and yet they had 10 kids. And not always because they needed 10 kids to work the land, because it was richness, it was wealth to have a lot of children too. So, and today people do the exact opposite with the same circumstances. Right? Now, the biggest change is the climate change. I think that the notion that, the world will cease to exist, that is a different fear. That is a new fear. So, but people talk about the polycrisis, and I'm not sure that there hasn't been a polycrisis before. Also wars, also epidemics, also.
We've had it all already throughout the years, right? Hundreds of years.
We've had a lot of the things. I think what we have, we've had technological changes, industrial revolutions. I mean, we've had complete remakes of our society before. And as in every conversation, when somebody says that, someone says, but this one is totally different. And then other ones, people say, but no, we have known this. So this is probably also a both end. Yes, we have known this, and yes, there are unique things to the evolution that is taking place at full speed in front of us right now, particularly the technological one.
So piggyback riding on what you just said, if we apply it to relationships, is it, the relationships have been going through different stages and challenges in the past hundreds of years. Is there anything new that wasn't here before between people?
Yes, there's a lot of things that are actually really different. people lived in tribes, people lived in communities, and people lived religious lives, and people lived in structures. And so there was a clear sense of what do you need to do. Basically, for your parents, or maybe, or certainly grandparents, the big decisions were all made for us. Where you're going to live, what you're going to do, who you're going to live with, you know. You didn't have to decide much of this. Will you have kids? Biology took care of it, you know. So the shift from structure to network, from tight knots to loose threads. We can go in and out of relationships at this point. We don't have to marry once, and it's for life, and if you don't like it, you can just hope for an early death of your partner. I mean, you know, this is, we can start at 60 and do the whole thing all over. There is a level of fluidity around relationships that is amazing. There is recognition of individual differences, from LGBTQ+ to a range of sexualities, including asexuality. To, I mean, it used to be that if you don't fit, you hide.
Yeah.
You just hide in order to be part of. So people had a sense of belonging, but they didn't have a sense of recognition. And people had to sacrifice their personal authenticity for the relationships. This has whole toppled. You sacrifice relationships for your authenticity. You have a tremendous amount of freedom. You've never been more free, and you've never been more alone. And the burdens of the self have never been heavier. And you find yourself having to make a ton of decisions for which there are no set answers, because you're allowed to design your relationships as wish. And it's very challenging. It's extremely liberating, but it's difficult to know what you want and to be sure about that and to stick behind it and to carry the consequences. And with the rise of individualism and the weakening of religion and the social structures, relationships are overwhelmed with expectations. With expectations, like unprecedented expectations that we bring, not just to romantic relationships, you know, and at the same time that we need more skills to negotiate all of this, we have less social skills, how to do it, because people are way more isolated than they ever were. So there's a ton of incredible things happening to relationships, and also a host of really challenging things.
Does it apply to friendships as well? Is
Yes.
it more challenging now than it was before?
First of all, when people lived in you know, when I say when, it's not that long ago here. People basically didn't move. You couldn't get out of your country, you couldn't get out of your village, you couldn't get out of your town. You met your people, and they were the friends that you were going to carry for life. People did not make friends in their 20s, 30s, 50s, 70s. You know, that whole notion that you can make friends in your adulthood. Friendship has completely shifted. And there's always been the closest friends, the people who support you, the people who betray you. I mean, it's an extremely rich relationship. But I think what I'm saying today is, when people use the word love or commitment, they typically take romantic relationships. And I think those words are just as applicable to friendships. And especially with the fluidity of our love relationships being so loose, it's the friendships that often last. And they have become the pillars, the solid relationships, especially in places where there's mobility. People don't always live close to their family, so they live close to their friends. So the friends become the family. Whereas before, you had the family, and you don't tell your dirty laundry outside of the family, and you don't tell this to your friends. Your friends will never do for you what your family would do for you. Well, in parts of great mobility, that statement has been shifting. It's, you know, your family is not there. Your family can't necessarily recognize you. Your friends are chosen at the moment, you know, in light of who you are now, and they will stick by you the way that your family can't do. I mean, this is a
shift, a huge shift.
I think that there is a weakening of relationships and friendships among men, Men always had friends, not that different from women, and their style, but men are way more isolated than they ever were. So that is a shift also around friendship.
How come?
How come? Because, I mean, I thought of that last year. I was in Greece and it was 7 o'clock in the morning. The fishermen came back. They all sat at the cafe. They talked together. This is before anything opens up, etc. And I thought, wow, these men have community. These men bond together. They've known each other, you know. Fishermen, doesn't matter, but they're sitting there at the cafe. And there's not that many places in the West these days where the men are sitting in the cafe in the morning or at night, talking to each other, basically, hanging out. Because she wants him home, and he may want to be home with her or with him partner. I mean, because the romantic unit has sapped a lot of the resources, because people often don't stay connected to their friends when they enter into a relationship. And when they don't have a relationship, women are better at staying connected and reaching out than men, who, you know, in the past, if you were not married, you stayed home. Now you live alone.
Do you consider the threat to...
I'm not saying one is good, one is not good, but I think it, you know, we don't address enough the issue of isolation among men, because the structures that absorbed that before made it so that they were not as isolated, simply.
And it shows up in the suicide statistics, at least in Poland. They just
all over, everywhere.
All over. Yeah, and it's just, it's brutal, because I think there's also the concept in society that men aren't invited to share and open up and be vulnerable as much as we women are doing it and are also invited to do it. What would be the way out? What would you suggest or direct towards, so that there will be more of that, so that they can reach out for help before they reach out for death?
For one, I would say there's not one model. I mean, the notion that you can be close because you share feelings is a very Western and very feminine model. It's a beautiful model, but it's not applicable to all. You can be very close and talk very little and not share about your inner life, but share about activities or the color of the sky, or, you know, the fish in the water, or the ball. It's fine. You know, I don't think that when you look historically, you could say that men didn't help each other. That they help each other on a different basis, and they ask for help maybe differently. They don't have to say, they don't have to speak a certain language of feelings and emotions for that. It's more the permission to stay connected. It's more challenging the notion that you are strong if you are independent, rather than you are strong if you are interconnected. That relationships strengthen you, they don't weaken you. I think those are overall notions. That you're not gay if you touch. That physical contact has been, you know, very, very important, especially in homophobic societies. Men have touched a lot. So I think we have to be careful on the gender division around this. I think in part it's to reinforce it, is to be encouraging of it. In heterosexual society, you'll see a ton of women going and hanging out with their girlfriends, and not that many men preserving their friendships with men or women or them. Doesn't matter. But the notion is that she absorbs it. She becomes the Minister of Social Affairs. Rather than it's go. Go, take a day, take a night, take a week, and go do something. You know, bond with others. And this
starts early.
It's actually, earlier they have a lot more friends. It's as they get older that it becomes worse. And people have always known it. They talked about it when they were older, and then basically there was this notion that, you know, the older guy will remarry. Because marriage was the way through which you maintained connection. Sex is the way through which you maintain intimacy, and marriage is the way through which you maintain connection. And family. But if these pieces are not at the center, then friendship becomes a major, it's always been, but it needs to be re-elevated and integrated.
One last segment I want to...
I keep being curious of what you think of, you know, of what I say, because these are thoughts, there's probably many other ways to answer the...
Yeah, well, as actually there's a huge discussion in Poland around men reaching out and attending groups and workshops and excursions dedicated only to them, so that could bind. Because my generation, I'm 42, is a generation of fathers that were not there. Well, they were physically, most of them, but they were either drinking or emotionally absent, and their fathers were, you know, they had their part in war. So it's like a generational gap of men introducing themselves
as an emotional unit.
Yes. So, but I can see from my psychological standpoint, and also noticing, maybe it's a not a best way to say it, but services for men. As I said, groups traveling together, doing stuff together, going into the forest for a weekend and creating stuff. I see more and more of that, which makes me happier as a psychologist, but also as a female who is in a relationship, that the absence of father figures can be somehow supplemented now. I know that you cannot heal the whole wound, but at least some part of it.
Because the family here was held by the mother.
Yeah.
And basically the fathers, especially if there was alcohol involved, were seen as useless.
Yeah.
And the best thing you could do is just kind of push them aside and have them be the least of the nuisance, so that you could actually do what you need to do. And that's a very, the legacy is, you know, the men were absent and the women didn't give them much room either.
Yes, and women were describing what manhood is to their children, which created a discrepancy in the what it really was, because they were explaining either the perfect man, which is not there, or the...
But the perfect man was meant to be the firstborn son.
Yeah, and it was a relationship between mother and the son.
That's right, that's right. That's been the traditional system.
Yeah.
Disempowered wife connects with her firstborn son. The firstborn son becomes the loyal, generous, thoughtful, loving figure, and you know, the husband basically. But this has been a model from Iran to Turkey to Poland. I mean, this has been quite the central thing. So the lives of women will not change until the lives of men change. And the women need to not be always that scared when men come together. Sometimes they come together for nasty reasons, and sometimes they actually come together to be different, to have the opportunity to change. Women have been re-questioning their identity for 50 years or more, and men have not yet been given that opportunity. And masculinity is a complex identity. It's very hard to acquire and very easy to lose. You constantly have to prove it.
To yourself and others, and women.
And to everybody. You constantly have to prove it. You know, so, but what's very interesting, I've only arrived a day ago, and it used to be that you come from, well, I live primarily in New York now, but you come from the States and you get the sense of how is it here, and what's different. And what I'm constantly noticing is that the Western culture is so pervasive and transparent that actually the same phenomena are happening here and there and everywhere. Maybe the US is sometimes more extreme in certain things, but it's not like this is happening only in the US and it's not happening here. It's the same influences
Yeah.
and influencers.
One last question to sort of sum it up. When I'm asked that kind of questions, I get like, there's no one answer, but please spare me and maybe you can try to answer the question like, what's the skill set, what's the skill that we all need to work on right now so that relationships, friendships, communities can thrive and not just only survive?
I think that one of the most important skill sets at this moment is the ability to hold contradictions. We live in a highly technological society that tries to come up with simple answers and solutions, binary solutions, and relationship questions and relationship dilemmas are not binary. They are complex, and they often are not problems that you solve, but paradoxes that you manage. And this either or, for me or for you, authentic or attached, you know, I find that is leading us in, you know, victim, perpetrator, powerful, powerless. It's a little bit more nuanced in relationships. Things are not always that linear, and they're not always that obvious. It's not always so clear who has the power. It's not always so, you know. So to hold the contradictions, to not rush for simple solutions, but then that means to be able to tolerate uncertainty. And that has become more challenging at this moment. We are not supported on that. And then you have a little phone in your hand that is giving you a host of predictive technologies that are giving you always on-demand, frictionless delivery of every delight. And you are not prepared for conflict. So we become more conflict avoidant. Actually, we have wars, but we are conflict avoidant in many of our relationships. I don't like it, I don't have to see you. I don't have to talk to you. I don't feel comfortable, I don't need to be in your presence. And that is going to create a lot of fracture. So the skill is, if you can hold contradiction, then you can live with people that are different from you. In the old world, we didn't live that much with people that were different from you. I mean, community was based on homogeneity. If you want a diverse world, then you need to be able to live with difference without it turning into an argument. And that is probably, it's the skill set that is needed for all relationships. How do you navigate self and other? If I'm only, you know, how do you navigate autonomy and connection, togetherness and separateness? This is a duality all the time. How do I connect to you and I don't lose me? And how do I stay connected to me and I don't lose you? And that balancing act is probably one of the most foundational to all relationships. More so today, because in the past, the relationship was more important than the individual. Now, we don't like it like that. We want the individual to be recognized, valued, respected in the relationship. But we can't just go from one extreme to another. It is the handling of both and rather than either or.
Thank you so much for your time and everything you bring into the world, not only to my world personally, but to the world of actually everybody, because, and this is what I want to thank you for especially, because in some magical way you bring light to darkness and darkness to light, so that we can learn from you, helping us understand the world, how to navigate the contradictions. So I don't know how you do it, but please keep on doing that so that we can navigate both, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you
so very
much.
much.
Thank you.